Wasantha Senanayake was elected to Parliament in 2010 from the UPFA. He's no stranger to politics because his great-grandfather, D.S. Senanayake, was our first Prime Minister, and his great-uncle, Dudley Senanayake, was elected to the post of Prime Minister 3 times and continues to be one of the best loved of Sri Lankan politicians. Wasantha, however, is a member of the SLFP and was elected to the Gampaha district, where he represents the Mirigama electorate. Soon after he was selected to lead a group of young MPs from different parties, the SLFP, the UNP, the TNA, the SLMC, which was mandated to engage with the diaspora in an effort to move towards reconciliation. This has been recommended by the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, but sadly our Minister of External Affairs has done nothing about it. But this group really had excellent interactions and produced a report on the way forward, though I suppose typically nothing has been done about it. However, Wasantha, on the basis of some of the suggestions that were made there, worked together with a group of young people to make suggestions to the Parliamentary Select Committee, which has been mandated to seek suggestions on durable solutions for our current problems. After he appeared before the committee, which seems to have taken his suggestions very well, he found that nothing further was happening, and indeed that committee has not produced even an interim report. So recently Wasantha decided that he needed to act, and he has put in a constitutional amendment, a proposal to amend the Constitution, so a private member's bill, which has been submitted to the Secretary General of Parliament, and which will, I hope, appear on the order paper, as did the last constitutional amendment proposed by an individual. Wasantha, can you tell me why you chose this particular aspect of the many in your proposals to the PSC to highlight and indeed to suggest that this is perhaps the most important of the proposals you and your group of young people made?
Well, I wouldn't say it is the most important proposals, but I think it is certainly one of the most important proposals that we have suggested.
This is to reduce the size of the cabinet?
It is to reduce the size of the cabinet, because we don't really think that jumbo cabinets benefit countries in general, because jumbo cabinets have the effect of, for one thing, incurring a huge amount of finances for any country, and therefore it is a huge waste of public funds. Ministries and ministers naturally entail that they have a large retinue of security personnel also assigned to them, vehicles, lots of other perks, officers. So all this is a drain on any nation, and we are a developing nation. And when you are a nation that is aspiring to, Sri Lanka aspires to be the wonder of Asia, but one of the things it needs to do is cut down on wastage if it wants to become the wonder of Asia. So having jumbo cabinets, for one thing, is a huge drain on public funds and public resources. The second thing is, having a huge cabinet brings about a lot of inefficiency and takes away responsibility. Now, what I mean by that is, when you have so many cabinet portfolios, it naturally means that certain subjects will definitely overlap. Now, you take the Ministry of Agriculture, for example.
So deep interest to your family.
Of course.
DS and Dudley made their mark on that.
Now, in the present context, we have a Minister of Agriculture, we have someone else for animal husbandry, we have someone else for irrigation, that is the water for agriculture, we have someone else who's in charge of agrarian research, we have someone else who's in charge of paddy cultivation, someone for coconut development, someone for small estates. It really becomes a joke when you have about 8 or 9 people handling the same subject. And what it does is it brings about a situation where nobody is ultimately responsible, because there's so much of overlap. so they can just keep passing the buck. And if somebody wanted to get, say do something pertaining to agrarian research covering the entire sector of agriculture, he would have to go to 8 or 9 different ministries. And God help that person if a couple of those ministers were overseas and not in this country. A scenario being passed from pillar to post sort of thing. So what you need is you need responsibility. You need a definite ministry. You need to know that these subjects come under this ministry. You need one ministry for handling one subject. And therefore it brings about certainty as well when you have a cabinet which is more limited but with subjects very clearly defined. And of course the other thing is it becomes a joke when you have a ridiculously large cabinet. Some of the portfolios that you invent, as it were, would cover very trivial subjects. I don't want to name them or embarrass any particular individual at this particular point because I don't think that is what we are here for. However, one must understand that when you have a cabinet with meaningless portfolios or very frivolous ones,
as some ministers have actually said of their own ministries,
it becomes a national joke. And once you make your cabinet a national joke, then the respect that a government is held in also comes down to some extent. So I think nationally there is a great need to have a reduced cabinet, I think, for all the reasons that I've mentioned.
I have a feeling everyone in the country will agree with you, except possibly those who now hold cabinet portfolios. But of course, we need to have an amendment through Parliament. I mean, do you think it will be very unpopular with decision makers in government, and in particular the President, whose support is needed for such an amendment?
Well, I think the President would realize, I'm sure he would if he really thinks about it, that if there is a constitutional provision which limits the cabinet ministers, the number of people he can appoint, then the minor parties that join the major parties and form coalitions will also ask for less cabinet folios because they know it's constitutionally impossible. Because now if a particular party demands 3 cabinet ministries and 2 deputy ministries or whatever, they'll just ask for 1 cabinet ministry or 2 deputy ministries or whatever and stop at that. Because what this recommendation does is it proposes that the cabinet be limited to 30. Now, the previous proposition to the PSC that I had made for constitutional reforms, which not only covered the cabinet but was a redraft of what we thought would be a good constitution for this country. We had actually suggested the number as 25, but we think some of the present members holding office might even get heart attacks when they see the number reduced to 25. So we've increased it a little bit to 30. But 30 is, I think, a good number that can be worked with.
I think it's too much, but still I can see your point.
The first cabinet of Sri Lanka had 14. And of course times have changed and the issues have become more complex, we understand. So 10 more would be more than adequate, but okay, we've given a further allowance of 6 and we've left room in the proposal for the President to nominate 5 new cabinet ministries apart from 25 constitutionally defined ministries. There's 5 more where he has the discretion to assign 5 new subjects and appoint 5 cabinet ministries.
So you envisage that there will not only be a fixed number, but portfolios will be fixed?
Yes, except for 5 where 5 are left to the discretion of the government in power. Presently, the President can keep all the ministries to himself. It hasn't happened, but you can just assign all the subjects to yourself if you want to. And if we have a mad President in the future, the mad President can keep all the ministries to himself and appoint nobody. So constitutionally, we shouldn't have that.
Right. No, I can see that. Yeah.
So only the Ministry of Defence should be in the hands of the President, and that is what we have recommended. And all other ministries to be appointed in the manner I said before, ranging to 31, because the President will hold the Ministry of defense within himself, and corresponding 31 deputy ministries, and get away with and remove the provision of having non-cabinet ministers, as it were, because now you can have non-cabinet ministers, you have project ministers now, you have senior ministers now, and of course President Jayawardena, who brought this constitution, had a minister without portfolio. He had district ministers.
Right.
So
it's often forgotten that under Jayawardena's government you had a far higher proportion of ministers.
Yes.
A far higher number of ministers than now.
Yes.
But let me ask, if this happens, many members of parliament on the government side would not have a portfolio, and they might think we have nothing to do now.
Well, we are not asking for it to happen immediately. We're saying by the next election, it should be reduced to 30. Of course, individual members of parliament can be given more responsibility in the select committees and whatever, if the select committees were made more meaningful.
Yes, I think one of the problems is that because everyone wants a ministry, they see that as the purpose of being in parliament. Yes. And as you and I know, the committees are dead at the moment. So you think this will strengthen them?
Well, we'll have to think of ways where the members of parliament are empowered in other ways, because having them all in the cabinet is ridiculous.
Yes,
in the old days, and certainly in other countries even now, you find in any government party the minority are the ones that are represented in the cabinet, and the majority are MPs that are not in the cabinet.
Right.
It is only in Sri Lanka that I think the majority are in the cabinet, and you have about 20 people who are maybe not. So it's a bit of an absurd situation.
Do you think that limiting the number will also enhance the selection criteria? Because at the moment, the president seemed to have a principle, which is why able people who are there in parliament for the first time were left out, that he only appointed people who had had previous experience in parliament. But now he has appointed a few more as deputy ministers.
Yes.
What do you suppose is the criteria for his election? Is it simply to do with if they make enough of a fuss, he has to give them a portfolio? Or do you think there's serious consideration of ability?
I think there are several factors that go into it now. I think one of the key factors for giving people ministries is not really their not really based on how good they are or how efficient they are, but rather on the fact that they come from constituent parties is one reason. The other reason is if they're senior enough in the party and they have won previous elections. You cannot give a first time and not give these senior people. So I think those two are the main criteria.
But in many other countries that happens all the time, that senior people are left out.
Yes, I think when there is a clear tradition of giving the best person the job, this problem doesn't arise. But that tradition hasn't existed in our country since 1978.
Right.
So there's a long established tradition now for about well over 30 years where you try to accommodate as many people as you can rather than give it to the best people.
Do you think this leads to, as it were, first class and second class ministries? You know, you mentioned the expenses of each ministry, and certainly the establishment costs are massive, but the budgeting for activity is actually very limited in most ministries.
Yes, of course, because if you see how much money has been allocated to ministries, you will see about 10 ministries that have been allocated a lot of money, and the others just handed over enough money to keep that ministry functioning.
Right.
So it's not really based on giving each ministry a proportionate amount of money. It is the ministries that they take seriously enough, that get enough money to deal with the issues that those ministries face, and the country faces, and the people face, and the related issue in that context. But the majority of ministries just get a meager amount just to keep that ministry.
I know, I still remember once, I think it was in Ranil Wickremesinghe's cabinet, when he, having started with a limited number, then added people on when there were pressures. I think there was one ministry that had no operational funding.
Yes.
And I think we're being reduced to that. But do you think the president would have great difficulty in making such elections? Now it's easy. He just appoints everyone in sight practically. But do you think he would find great difficulty? I mean, would he welcome this sort of amendment? Do you think he would understand that in the end it would benefit the country?
I think he would understand that it benefits the country, and I think he knows that the people of this country have been referring to this constitution, the 1978 constitution. I think he knows this very well because he's been in opposition for a long time as well. People of this country have been referring to this constitution as, in Sinhala they refer to it as Jaya's Gate, or the knot that Jaya tied, which nobody else has been able to untie. Now the president is a man who's been able to solve the unsolvable, and I'm talking about the war. Most people had it in their minds, it was almost entrenched in the minds of people in this country and in the world that guerrilla warfare could not be defeated. But he was able to prove or disprove that theory or that notion. So if he is able to prove to the people of this country that he was a man who untied Jaya's almost unremovable knot, I think the people of this country respect him immensely. I think that respect will go up tremendously, and I think it will help him and his party further at elections.
No, I personally have no doubt that if he wanted to have constitutional amendments, he would succeed.
So,
but maybe he doesn't see the necessity, or is it that it is all these minor parties that are holding him to ransom?
Could be. He may have complaints from members of parliament, but throughout the country and the population of this country, he will find great support if he does this, and that is why I am strongly advocating that he does. It is not by any means an anti-government move. It is I explained this even to the select committee that initially asked me something to the extent of whether it was not quite so directly, but whether it was a move to sort of embarrass the government. It has nothing to do with embarrassing the government. It is to do with giving more credibility to the government, rather.
No, I would certainly think, given the plummeting popularity of the government, that a measure like this would enhance their popularity.
Because, see, this is what I told them at the PSC as well. This constitution is not President Mahinda Rajapaksa's baby. It is not President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga's baby. It is not the baby of the Bandaranayakas, Mr. or Mrs. It is not the SLFP's baby. This is Jaya Jayawardena's baby that has still existed and lasted and become stronger today. So we have, I think everyone in the SLFP, from Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga to President Mahinda Rajapaksa, have protested over this constitution, spoken ill about this constitution for years and years and years, gone on protest marches against this constitution. I remember President Kumaratunga used to describe this constitution in Sinhala as the Bahubhuta Vivastava, or ludicrous constitution. Giving some credit to her, she did make one attempt to some extent do away with this constitution, and I think at that time her attempt was resisted very strongly by the United National Party, where they tore it up and burnt it and all.
What do you think the UNP would do if you brought this proposal forward, or how would they vote if this came to Parliament?
Well, I think now there might be a change in mindset, because they realize that under this constitution, and given the fact that they find it so hard to win elections, that is actually working against them.
Right.
So for that purpose, although I don't think it is for truly altruistic purposes, they might actually support the government initiative to do away with this constitution. Of course, I think the other minor parties, the smaller parties, will, I think, almost all support it, the ones that are in opposition anyway.
Right.
Those that put themselves before the country might find it difficult to deal with the notion of a reduced cabinet, because they might want to actually sit in it.
Right.
And they might find that a constitutional stipulation to reduce numbers might actually stifle that idea of just sitting pretty and occupying a seat in cabinet.
Right. Do you think that perhaps you also need to put this forward, and we should perhaps talk of some other points, we may not have time, as a package, so that when you reduce the possibility of members of parliament being put into the cabinet, which I agree is necessary, you have to give them a compensatory factor. You know, strengthen the power of parliament through the committees, as you said. Maybe even enhance their, let's say, influence within the electorate by giving them more of a tie to local government.
Yes, I think we have sort of incorporated that in the recommendations made to the PSC, because we have sort of brought more interaction and participation by tying up to an extent the local government and the provincial council,
Right.
and then having the provincial council tied up with a bicameral parliament.
Right.
So we have made recommendations to that effect as well. Because if you take we were just dealing with one aspect, that is the cabinet,
Yeah.
and reduction of numbers in cabinet. But we have actually presented an entire constitution, a bicameral legislature, a Senate and a House of Representatives, a Vice President, a Chief Minister that is elected directly by the people in Provincial Council.
You know, I would really like the opportunity to look at much more of these points. I don't think we have time here to do this. I hope there'll be another opportunity. But let me just end with one area that I think affects the size of the cabinet, in the sense that people claim that they should be appointed because they did well under the present electoral system. But the people who do well under the electoral system are not necessarily those with executive capacity. You know, one simple point is one of the best ministers we have, Sarath Amanugama, is not even a minister, although he's a senior minister and a junior minister, because he's simply because he came last in the list.
Yes.
But I would have said he's outstanding compared to the other
Yes.
people from Kandy. So do you think the electoral system actually also contributes to the size of not only the cabinet, but also to the lack of having an effective cabinet?
Yes, because I think it is one thing to say that somebody got the most amount of votes, but that doesn't necessarily make him or her the most suited person to be a minister in cabinet. Take the example of, you know, a very, very popular soap opera star or something, that or a sports personality. I'm not really referring to any particular personality who's in parliament now or was in parliament. There have been many actors from the time of Vijay Kumaratunga elected into office and or contesting elections.
Right.
And you have some getting elected, some not getting elected. We have sports personalities now in parliament. You have them at the Palat Sabha levels, you have actors, you have actresses. So some of them are okay in what they do. I mean, they are okay as parliamentarians. Some of them clearly have a lot to learn. However, when it comes to the popular vote, they might be more popular than a very erudite member of the cabinet. Or they might be more popular than you, for example, even though you're a professor.
Well, I don't think professor needs to be popular, but let us talk of people of political capacity like Amanugama or whatever.
Yes. So what I'm trying to say is you might have a highly erudite person, an engineer, a person who knows a lot about irrigation. He might come fifth on the list, and some young, popular actor, good-looking actor or actress might come first.
Right. Yeah, we'll see that happen, of course.
But the person who should be Minister of Irrigation is the engineer who knows a lot about irrigation and has worked in the Department of Irrigation or something. Should actually become the minister because he's knowledgeable on that subject. However, if you take the popularity in terms of votes, he probably doesn't get as much as the soap opera star who's known right throughout the country.
Right. No, I think that's correct, but maybe that leads us to another question. You know, is it necessary to actually have cabinet ministers from within parliament, because in every other executive presidential system in the world, the president is at liberty to choose the best person to do the job, not one of the members of parliament. So would you also think it's an idea to expand it? You know, even in countries where you have a parliamentary system, you usually have a system of safe seats and second chambers, where very capable people who are not electorally popular can then become ministers.
That is why the Senate is also fairly important, because you can have a different category of person
Right.
who contests the Senate, the election for to become senators at a provincial level, maybe. That is what we have suggested.
So what you're really saying is you want a tight, efficient executive that goes with what is supposed to be the raison d'etre of the presidential system.
Yes, and of course the Senate can have another function also of trying the judiciary and so on and so forth.
It's not subject to electoral considerations.
Where there's separation of powers, and where it doesn't seem that natural justice is breached, because here you have Parliament accusing the judiciary, you have Parliament trying the judiciary, and you have Parliament removing the judiciary.
No, I mean you're correct, because Sri Lanka kept saying when the impeachment.
I think the impeachment of the Chief Justice was reasonably constitutional, because that is what the Constitution says. But the Constitution is in breach of natural justice.
I think you're right, because the people in support of that impeachment cited the Philippine Constitution, which is very different. The House of Representatives brings the motion, the Senate tries it.
Yes.
I think, Wasantha, we should perhaps stop now, but I would really suggest that you publicize not only this important constitutional amendment, but perhaps the rest of your proposals, because they seem to form part of a package. And perhaps think of ways of conveying to the country at large, as well as the government, why it is in everyone's interest that at least some of these should go forward. I hope you're thinking of doing this.
Well, I will try, but as a younger MP and as a first-time MP, sometimes I think our efforts are more ably assisted if senior people and senior ministers also get on board and assist us. So I think I will make a plea to the senior members also to join the effort. I must say one or two have responded positively.
Right. And you said the PSC was listening to what you said.
Yes, and I think they actually said it at the end after grilling me, basically. They said it was quite well thought out, which I found was positive.
That's good. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.